And when you have to go through that area to get from one spot to the next, you just know you're just going like this, you know. And I think something could be done in that. I don't think it, you know. I know you can't get rid of them, but I think it could be controlled. I really do.
Well, thanks for your time.
All right, thank you.
Good to see you.
Thanks for listening.
All right, with that, we're gonna move on to proposals. Number 10. Tom, you heading this one up too? Not giving, you getting overtime this week or? I haven't heard anything from Simpson and you're doing all the talking.
Asked Director Simpson if he wanted to take this on today, and he said no, thank you.
He's like a free agent. I mean, you assign stuff to him as needed and this wasn't one of them, huh?
I guess not. Mr. Chairman, I am going to ask Andrew to come up. Andrew is our award administrator, and he's going to provide you an information item that's listed on your agenda again to provide a little bit of background on this issue, and then you will take the lead of going through the action sheets. There's obviously high interest, as we heard from the open forum today, and several emails and texts that all of you have received on this topic. And we do appreciate all the input on this. We know this is meaningful, impactful, and something that is of high interest to a lot of folks. And we certainly understand that, appreciate that. We've gone through a lot of steps and processes that have been talked about already, from petitions in the past to conversations at commission meetings to doing a public input opportunity this fall, a stakeholder group meeting, and just one-on-one conversations with people. Lots of ideas, lots of recommendations have come forward. You are all familiar already what's in front of you, and in particular, some of the recommended ideas or suggestions from the public as well. But I think it's also important to point out that honestly, folks, we're at the beginning of this conversation as well. We went through a lot of the phase of collecting ideas from, and we put together ideas. We brought forward a recommendation based on a lot of those ideas and conversations that took place. And so this is the starting point of that conversation. So I'm going to ask Andrew to come up, give you a brief PowerPoint on some background information, and then we can go into your action sheets and take the conversation from there.
Good afternoon, commissioners. Chairperson, Secretary Roebling. As Tom mentioned, I'm Andrew Norton, and while the program administrator, I'm here this afternoon to follow up on a presentation that I provided 2 months ago, I believe, on this topic. So I'll have a little bit of summary first, and then I'll get into specifics of the proposal. So background, this is again just review. As you're well aware, the number of bow hunters in the state has steadily been increasing the last 10 years. That seems to somewhat buck the trend in population growth of deer. You can see there from 2005 to 2010, bow hunters more followed what we had with deer trends, a steep increase through the 2000s and a steep decrease. But since bow hunters steadily increased, you can see the figure on the left there. This has been more evident with antelope hunters. They've doubled in the last 10 years, whereas deer hunters have increased by 30%. The green line shows residents, the blue line shows non-residents. So both groups have been increasing at approximately the same rate. Both groups are currently unlimited. The red dots, just for reference, show the archery harvest the last 10 years as well. And you can see that's steadily been increasing, somewhat contrary to what populations have been doing. So essentially, archery hunter success has stayed relatively stable in 10 years, but hunters have increased. The crux of this issue, as you're well aware and have heard several times, is that there's to be some primary concerns on public land. And I know a question came up last time about hunter densities on public versus private. There's about 6 times as many antelope hunters on public compared to private, and there's about 5 times as many deer hunters on public compared to private. So this isn't just a perceived issue. This is probably real, where we see a lot more hunters on public, which isn't news to anyone. Also, I'll start by saying this is more of an issue of crowding. I hate to use the word social versus biological, but it truly is social. There certainly is biology involved with bucks being harvested, but what this really is it's a a perceived competition with other hunters and who gets an opportunity to harvest bucks. With that being said, we did isolate the discussion to just archery. A lot of comments came in regards to archery versus other seasons firearm, for instance. Fortunately, we have the opportunity later next year to bring deer recommendations in March, as well as a deer action plan. We're going to have several stakeholder meetings and discuss archery in the context of other seasons a lot more. But for today, keeping this focused on just archery, kind of an isolated issue. And as Tom said, trying to just tip of the iceberg approach here, not rock the boat, hopefully too much. Another thing I'll say is we've had lots of discussions about population management. Again, this being more of an issue related to buck harvest. This doesn't really have, our recommendation doesn't have relation to population management. So when we're talking about low mule deer numbers, or maybe even low whitetail hunter numbers in certain areas, or disparity in harvest of archers versus other seasons, this recommendation today doesn't address that. This is just going to be addressing the archery hunters, again, focusing on bucks. So we didn't look at, for example, antlerless harvest of archery. This was, again, just focused at density on public land specifically, as you'll see with our recommendation. So I'll really briefly go through this. A lot of the comments today summarize this fairly succinctly. You can clearly see that there's opinions on both sides of the fence here. We sent a questionnaire out to all hunters, so they had an opportunity to provide input, hunters from the past 3 years. Some would say the survey results weren't very reliable because they were low response, but more importantly, what that says is this is an isolated issue. So it's not pervasive across all hunters, only about 10% on average responded. I will say, however, some might question the statistical integrity of the survey. It's not that far off because we were able to almost exactly estimate the number of archery hunters on public land, because we have that for deer because they have to buy a license. For April 1st, we were within 1.5% of that estimate. So while some may question the merits of the survey, I do feel that it provided a pretty good perspective of, if you will, opinionated hunters. We followed up the questionnaire with a stakeholder meeting. They were generally in agreement with much of what the survey said. Again, we read through the thousands of comments, and we know that opinions vary across the board, as you heard today as well. But in general, this was an issue primarily related to hunters on public land, and specifically the residents were concerned that there were too many non-residents. We had multiple Game Fish and Park staff meetings to develop a list of options. That was a challenge even internally. We had about 8 options that we whittled it down to, but before that, we probably had dozens of recommendations. So I want to go through just a summary of the options that came. There's 2 general categories. One was limit the number of hunters just generally across the entire state. The other was to limit hunters by area. One thing to keep in mind, again, circling back to what Director Kirschman said, was we're trying to treat this as the iceberg, maybe first step. One challenge we have, especially with deer, is regulation is extremely complex, sometimes hard for staff to even understand. So while we could treat this with the scalpel and come in with extremely complex regulations, we wanted to take a first approach of seeing baby steps, again, if you will, to try to provide a recommendation that might start to address some of the concerns. So options to limit hunts just statewide more generally. Obviously, we just put a cap on total numbers across the entire state. You see a nuance of that in the proposal is that we wanted to also provide unlimited opportunity on private land, because we essentially heard very, very limited complaints or justification for limiting hunters on private land. As you saw in that first slide, there was over 5 times as many hunters on public land. Private landowners are able to self-regulate the number of hunters on their property. Another option, again, this adds a little bit of complexity. You can see it didn't come into favor with the recommendation we have today, was to focus just exclusively on mule deer. That would be to limit the number of archery hunters, but then provide an unlimited number of any deer licenses on private land, but in addition, provide an unlimited number of any whitetail licenses. So essentially what we would be doing by default is limiting the ability to harvest a mule deer buck. Again, a lot of these proposals today don't address population management. It's just strictly hunter crowding and buck harvest. Some other options, this is maybe more of a scalpel approach, would be add limited access units. One thing we heard with internal staff discussions, comments from the questionnaire, in addition to the stakeholder survey, was we could add limited access units, but it might shift the problem. We did that 3 years ago in Unit 35L, Custer National Forest. It has provided some benefit up there, but it may shift hunters onto other public land in Hardin County, Perkins County up in northwestern South Dakota. Another option is to move to more of a unit or regional approach and divvy those hunters out spatially. This is certainly an option, but again, goes down the path of adding a lot more complexity. So you can imagine, looking at the proposals, kind of what we arrived on. I won't repeat myself here, but we wanted to minimize complexity. We want to be consistent between antelope and deer to again, try to make things as easy to understand, so we're not completely different with what we do with the two different species. So obviously we have a lot more resident hunters and we have non-residents. So proposals you'll see today that we have a recommendation for you to approve are no change to resident archery. And so the restrictions would just be based on non-residents. That would be to eliminate East River, West River archery licenses. And then to put a cap on non-residents on public land at 25% below what we think are the current numbers right now. You can see, how did we get to that 25%? We know how many hunters purchased a license that was valid on public, but that doesn't necessarily mean they hunt a lot on public. So what we wanted to do based on that survey, again, I said it was pretty accurate, within 1.5% of actual number that exclusively hunted public. We wanted to take the number of hunters that said they hunted 50% or more on public. So you can see in the second column there, 54% of deer hunters, 69% of antelope hunters hunted 50% or more on public. We can multiply that by the total number of hunters to get that third column, our estimate of those number of hunters based on the 2021 license sales. This is unique deer hunters, by the way. And then the percent cut, approximately 25%. That's why how we arrived on the 2,200, 450. Obviously, one of the comments was this isn't quite the 8%, wherever that may have come from, but it also isn't 5%, which we have on Custer National Forest of the number of non-residents relative to residents, and that's exclusively public. So that could be another way to look at this. With that, I can take it. Questions on this, and then I can bring the action items as well.
One question.
Sure, Commissioner Rissler.
The antelope numbers, I want to go back a couple of months ago. The GMP team came to us and talked to us about concerns with antelope because of the drought and predators. And does this number reflect any of that at all?
No, I gleaned over it with these proposed, they are isolated to just looking hunter density and crowding and more of a social issue. If you remember back to the antelope recommendations and finalizations that were approved, can't quite remember, June or July. Yeah, July this year. They eliminated any antlerless, or not antlerless, female harvest on the archery license for antelope. So we've already removed that for.
Yes, I do remember that.
Other questions? Go ahead,
Chairman, is there any outlook on public lands that were slowed down? I mean, shut off from medders, killing mule deer. Is that somewhere in the proposal at all to limit archery hunters to not killing mule deer does?
Again, we looked at this concern based almost exclusively from the petition where it's a crowding issue. We didn't look at a population level management. We certainly could do that, or it's obviously the commission's prerogative to do that now, but we will be bringing archery deer in March, as well as the deer action plan, where we'll have several stakeholder meetings and we can vet that a lot more options to reduce antlerless mule deer harvest, whether that be through eliminating doe harvest on archery licenses, There's obviously still type 1 firearm licenses where there's the majority of antlerless mule deer harvest that occurs. And there's several other landowner licenses and other options to reduce and or eliminate mule deer doe harvest.
Mr. Chairman, and again, Commissioner Spring, in respect to archery deer season, remember that all antlerless deer licenses for archery are whitetail only. So that holds true for archery deer hunting, muzzleloader deer hunting. Antlerless licenses are whitetail only.
Now, you mentioned 35L, and you remember when we worked with the South Dakota bow hunters and other sporting groups to put on the constraints of that to help lessen that burden of non-resident pressure, and we gave residents like an early crack at it. To be proof in the pudding, after we did that, I applied for and got the access permit. I spent 3 days in the rain, moved on. I mean, it's beautiful country, but if it rains for 3 days and you're a resident, you can go home. If you're a non-resident, you come on for 10 days, you're sticking it out. And I would argue that's probably, when Dean and I have had this conversation, that's why they have a higher success rate. They didn't come there so that they would have to go pick up kids from school. They don't have to go to somebody's birthday party there for that period to do one thing, and that's hunt. And so I think that the thing about those guys having a higher success rate, it probably doesn't matter if you're in Colorado, if you go to Alaska, if you go to Wyoming, you're one thing, and that's just a hunt. And so your non-residents probably do have a higher success rate. The one thing that we keep coming back to, and we kind of bounce on it, and I think that we could have got it there, because I know, we're in a non-motorized unit, and there's people out there. Same said, if you needed the access permit like I have, and you don't have it, what's our incident for finding people that are in there that they're supposed to have the access permit compared to what the fine is? And does that weigh in on their decisions? And or should we be considering upping the fee for someone that has a private land only tag, land that knowing, and again, it goes back to knowing, but that they know that they're between public land and private land. And they're on their hunting. Why aren't we having that conversation of making that sting a little bit more than it does now? And I'm fully in favor of hitting somebody in the wall. In non-residents, we do it to them all the time. You're coming all the way out here. If you knowingly do that, wham, it should hurt. And so while we're having this conversation, I wanted to just see if you guys talked about that internally or not. I'd like to see that. $120, believe me, if you're coming from another state, $120 at the end of the day, you go, well, all right, if I can get this big buck, not get caught, I'll pay the $120.
Mr. Chairman, and I am going to ask Chief Sam Scalehouse to help answer these questions from a law enforcement perspective, because those are the folks that deal with those circumstances and situations. I would believe in the grand scheme of things, somebody that has a private land license, by and large, and for the most part, is going to be respectful of that and following the rules and guidelines of a private land license. And are there bad apples out there that will see something and get the best of them? I have no doubt that there is, correct? We know that those things happen. So I would ask Chief Scalehouse to please chime in here, and he can maybe answer a little bit more of, number one, how often do we see that or deal with it? Is it more frequent than we believe, or is it not? And in respect to the fines themselves, again, I would have Mr. Katilnik come in here. We have these rules in it, or these guidelines and regulations and administrative rule. As they fall within administrative rule, those fines are set based on a class 2. Now, if there's certain fines that would want to be higher based on circumstances, then I believe that those actions would have to take more legislative or statute action. Kind of like we had conversations about increasing the fees for like a second knowing trespass. And we've had those conversations before to make that sting a little bit more, using your analogy. So Sam, if you're still on the phone, could you please provide some information to the commissioners on frequency or issues around people with a private land license, for example, or a non-access permit hunting area, there's an access permit?
Yes. Good afternoon, Commission. My name is Sam Scalehouse, Law Enforcement Chief for the Game, Fish, and Park. Just to clarify, could you make sure I'm on the right track here? You're looking at The folks with archery licenses that are private land only or vice versa that are violating that. Is that my tracking correct?
That's correct, Sam. Or for example, somebody that does not have an access permit for 35L, for example, and then is going in there and hunting. How frequent are those infractions happening, or do our officers deal with those situations?
Yeah, Tom, pretty infrequent, and they do happen. I know I've had a few in my time when I was in the field, you know, particularly with a chap area or something like that, controlled hunting access where there is a special access permit needed. I know they have come across them in places very infrequently in like Adams Nature area or Gooder State Park where those access permits are there, but I have not heard of any of our officers having issues with this out in western South Dakota. Does that answer the question?
It does, Sam. I'm surprised, to be honest with you, that we don't see more of that, because they are bad apples, and we're going to have that no matter what we do today, tomorrow, or 10 months from now on this or any other issues. We can't prevent bad apples just because, you know, that's just, it's in their element. They were brought up the same way the rest of us were, you know, so I appreciate you weighing in on that. And maybe Sam will get you there more time too. The difference in our ability today to potentially amend or make changes to this between now and finalization of these, where the fee structure for doing that is concerned. Are we, do we have our hands tied, as Tom may have concerns with, or do we have the authority to make changes there at a higher time for this?
Yeah, when it comes, Mr. Chairman, when it comes to some of the ARSDs that Tom was referring to, those are class 2 misdemeanors, and most of those are laid out in a fine and bond schedule that gets put out every year. And so at this point in time right now, we're I think there's a potential to amend if needed. I've never done that, and I would work with our Mr. Katilnik to look into that more. But otherwise, it's every year in March, we make recommendations to a committee that looks at the fine and bond schedule, and then July 1 is when the new one starts.
Yeah, well, thanks again, Sam. And while we got in here with the mic in his hand, he was the next guy I was going to go to if we didn't have the right answers. We got to make sure that John's getting the per diem here today. So I'll go ahead, John, if you don't mind trying to answer that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, John Katilnik, staff attorney. I heard a couple questions and conversations about, you know, the fine amount and whether it's enough that to act as a deterrent. And these aren't unsimilar conversations that we've had even recently with AIS and bugs and things like that. Unfortunately, most of the general public doesn't have a knowledge of how much a fine is, right? So even you can increase it to $1,000 and it still might not deter people because they don't know what the fine is until they actually do it. So that's just one thing to consider about the bond schedule. To Sam's point, the class 2 versus class 1 misdemeanors, the class 1, and Sam, free to correct me at any point, but the class 1 misdemeanors depending on how the officers write the ticket. There are many ways to write a class 1 misdemeanor for a violation of taking a game. Let's say, and again, I'm speaking totally off the cuff, taking big game without the proper license. And that could potentially be a violation of statute, which it would be a class 1 misdemeanor, which would include higher fines and which would cause the person to lose their hunting privileges for a year. And again, Sam can correct me, that's probably a bigger deterrent than any fine imposed, is if a hunter loses their hunting privileges or fishing privileges for a year. So those are some of the things to consider, and we can certainly explore, you know, some of those deterring effects. But, you know, I might work with Sam a little bit more in the coming month or so to figure out if there is a way under our current system to potentially write those tickets in a manner that would address the deterrent factor.
Yeah. Thanks, Sean. And that's the good news. Today is the last step on the ladder for this process. And the fact that we're having the conversations win for South Dakota bow hunters. And quite frankly, I think the Landowners Alliance folks too. I mean, this if we're pushing people off public land, they may have to be contacting some of Mr. Bell's clients to get onto their land to hunt. So I'm kind of hoping that we're at a win-win. And we worked, this thing was dead. I mean, the South Dakota Bow Hunters brought their ideas forward. It died, and that's where it could have stayed on the shelf. We, out of mutual respect for the relationships that we built over the years, said that we bring some forward. You have, this is 100% more than nothing. And that's what we started with. And I think it is a step in the right direction. When we start to talk about public lands being available to our citizens of South Dakota first, and then other folks. We don't want to deter people from coming here. And I don't think these are deterrents. It just makes you think a little more clearly when you're mapping out your plans to come to our state. And I'd really like to see you guys work, John, on something different on the fee schedule. Maybe it even goes into the notice thing, Chris, and anybody in the licensing, when they get their notice, their thing is the big pink ticket says, hey, by the way, this is for private land only. You step over the line, it's $500. And that they can say, well, then I mean, if you afford it, go for it, But I really do appreciate staff. I appreciate Dana and his group for the work that's went into this. I think that we're moving in the right direction. We're not done, but again, today, with all the work that's been done, we're moving in the right direction. This isn't the end of the process. It's the very beginning of a great conversation. So appreciate everybody that's been involved thus far. And with that, I think we can go on to, if anybody has any questions or thoughts before we move on, I'd like to go on to the action items that are before us, which are number 12, and Tom are.
So what I'd like to do is start with the archery deer hunting season action item. Again, Andrew Norton, Wildlife Program Administrator. So this is chapter 410622, and I mentioned some of the changes you will see before you here on page 50 agenda. One of the first changes is specify that the East River and West River license types are only valid for residents now. We'll no longer have an East West River license option that's available for non-residents. Creating an limited number of deer licenses on private land, not least the Department of Game requires for public hunting, may be issued for ARD ST1s. That's the statewide private land only. And then the next line on you can see there is the cap on the any deer type license. That would be at 2,200 non-residents. The next section to modify ARSD 41062201.02. That essentially removes the application. If you remember, non-resident application deadline of April 1st with the cap that no longer is necessary because the cap 2,200 that was placed several years ago to essentially be a deterrent for some hunters that pick up a license last minute on public land in South Dakota. Obviously now they would be in some sort of application period, would occur maybe sometime during the summer, similar to maybe the other deer house. And then finally, ARSD 41062203.01 is again just putting in place specifying that we're removing that East River, West River for non-residents. We're limiting it to one statewide any deer license for non-residents. So that specifies that they can't pick up the any deer license in addition to the any deer license valid on private land. So it would only be one license that would have the opportunity to harvest a buck for archery non-resident hunters, and then setting up draw for that as well. So if that we would make our recommendation for the commission proposal as.
Mr. Chairman, and one other piece for you, if you look at the back page, we put together a table too, just as a more of a visual, just easier to see what's currently in place and then wonder what it would look like under this recommendation as a reference for you also.
Okay. Questions, comments? If not, I'd entertain a motion. Question from Commissioner B.
Non-residents taking up both West River and East River tags.
Through the chair. So in 2021, there were 71 and there were 62 this year so far.
to not a very large amount. So it's really not a factor by eliminating just a few tags like that then, in my opinion. Thank you.
Other questions or comments? Commissioner Lackman.
Yeah, getting back to that same subject, do they buy those tags before they come out here, or do they harvest an East River, then buy another tag and go West River?
Go ahead.
Through the chair. So if they waited after that April 1 time, they only obviously harvest the animal on private land, but they had to harvest one East River, West River on public land to buy it before April 1st.
I'm sorry, yeah, that's right. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Yep, another question?
Not really a question, just a comment. I believe this is a good place to start. I'm really not in favor of all of it. That's why, I'll make the motion to move it ahead, but some of the things I've been thinking about, I don't think it's near restrictive enough. I like the 8% limit on the non-resident tags. I also like the idea of the units, regional units. I mean, we don't let our rifle hunters grab a tag and just go anywhere they want, and I don't believe our archery hunters should be able to do that either. We removed a lot of does out of other hunting units, and I think we should do the same with the archery hunters. When we're trying to draw a population, I think all seasons should have the same implementation put on them. Just in low population areas. I believe we should limit the residents and non-residents on public lands with access permits on the bigger blocks of public lands. And then I like to take the social element out of it. I know we know what the social element is, but I don't believe that's the way we manage wildlife. We manage wildlife for the wildlife's best interest. And I think that's what we need to do. It's good to know the social side. When it comes to actual management of the species, we need to manage the species, not social acceptance. And then, then my other question was answered by the non-resident boat tags, but I think that's a pretty low number to be cutting out. It's not a big factor. And I personally think it should be left east and West River. But I will make the motion to approve the proposal. Just because of the fact that we have options to explore more avenues and to make changes to it.
Very well. Motion,
Second.
motion and second by Bartling. Any discussion on the motion?
This is Commissioner Rissler. I concur with Commissioner Bees on this one. I'm gonna move forward with it. I think there's a little bit of tweaking that needs to be done. I like the direction that we're going. We heard a lot over the concern of non-residents going on to public land when they're not supposed to. And I like the idea that Chairman Olson brought up. Let's hit it where it hurts. If they're gonna come into our state and break our rules, I think our consequences should be bigger. I am gonna move forward with this, and I think this is a good conversation that the stakeholders have had, and I like the direction that we're going.
Commissioner Spring.
I think that this archery hunt going to the amount of hunters that there are now, that eventually it's gonna have to get divided up into units. Because how can we control these thousands of hunters from not congregating in 2 or 3 areas with high percentage of, like the Black Hills, Harding County? It's got to be divided out, just like the rifle deal. We can't run the deer herd real well without controlling where they are hunting. And you turn that many thousands of people out and half of them go to 2 different spots, it's gonna work. So I think something to look to, I don't know if it'll get done now, but it's something that should be in our heads to work on. Thank you.
Any other comments? Commissioner, yeah, I too would, in favor of the motion. I couldn't agree more with every comment made here. I've got great respect for staff and they, I'm not gonna try to pretend like I don't think them and they do the best they can. I think they're doing a great job in listening to people, putting the groups together to get the voices heard. And, and you can't give everybody everything, and make anybody particularly happy, especially in something this. I mean, it's, I've got the privilege of serving with Commissioner B, whose father was instrumental in getting the archery season started in South Dakota. And here are, next generation, we've got 20% almost of the deer tick is by archery. So it's a bigger deal. And it continues to grow, and I think the regulations that we support and put through, need to grow with it, and this is the next step for that. So, we in favor of this. Okay. Any other comments? Motion and any other, seeing none, I'll indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries.
All right, so we'll move on to the next item on the agenda here, which would be page 12 of your agenda, archery antelope hunting season. As you'll see, much of these changes reflect what I just discussed, similar to the deer hunting season for archery. Rate of Rule 4106-401. You can see the changes there specify that the unlimited license type is to residents only. The creation of an unlimited license, one tag archery antelope license valid on private land only for non-residents, and then residents with any antelope that's valid on public and private at more than 450 non-resident one tag archery antelope licenses. Again, as Tom mentioned, we've got the table at the bottom there that kind of steps through the process, all very similar, and as I mentioned, fortunately for antelope, it's a little bit less complex dealing with only one species compared to the two with deer. So we ask again for approval of the proposal as presented here.
Anybody have any questions? In a second. There's no motion, I was just asking, Commissioner, do you have a question?
I was very happy to see that you left the does out on all this antelope hunting, and that's statewide, wherever there's antelope, wherever you have a hunt. I was in hopes that your first proposal would have been more on the antelope side with the deer, but I'm very glad to see you did it with the antelope.
Any other questions or comments? Other questions and comments? I'd entertain a motion. Vote to approve. And a motion to approve by Whitmire, seconded by Bees. Any comments on the motion? Seeing none, all in favor indicate by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. I think with that takes us to number 13 on our agenda. Pet allowances in park facility. One controversial topic after another for you, Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was afraid I wasn't gonna get a chance to visit with you today. Now you'll know I wasn't slipping. Thank you, Mr. Chair, Commissioner, Secretary Roebling, Scott Simpson, Director Division. We've been talking about this for a couple of months now. I don't know that I need to go back over everything in the whole world. It's pretty straightforward. We currently do not allow pets in any of our facilities in the parks. Some recent changes to the way people travel, to what society is asking for. We believe that this proposal to allow pets in some of our facilities with a moderate fee, $10 per reservation, will kind of keep us up with what the traveler is looking for. I would say that I have learned something along the process. And, you know, as I've listened to commissioners, as I've taken stock of some of the comments that we received, as I visited with my staff. You know, in the beginning, they were saying, you know, maybe we need to hold some of these things back and make them, we don't want pets in some of those. And I probably didn't give that as much consideration as I have. And, you know, as this thing has matured, as we've had those conversations, as the comments have come in, I would say I've become even more advocate of that. I think that, you know, just the comments themselves that we've seen from the public say not every, you know, one size doesn't fit all in this deal. There should be some facilities that are left pet free, that we've got folks with allergies and maybe preferences or whatever that is. And, you know, I think as a, you know, our staff were there before I was. So I think once they prove that they are a lot smarter than I am. So I think with this finalization with the proposal or the, excuse me, the finalization that you have in front of you right now gives the department and my folks and our operations team the ability to say, yeah, an amount of inventory that should be available to pet owners, and for that we've got a certain number that we should probably set aside and say, yeah, this probably isn't a great fit. We've got some other travelers that have different requirements, but it does give us the flexibility to decide where that happens and how it happens. And I think that's great because not at each and every park is created equal. We do have, you know, take Shade Hill for an example. We get a lot of hunters in there in the fall. You know, things are a little bit different in Shade Hill than they are maybe at Lewis Clark throughout the entire season. So it gives us a chance to look at this and say, hey, what makes sense? What makes sense for our travelers? Maybe we start out slow, we increase inventory, or maybe have to pull back. But it gives us a lot of options, and I do think it's the right moving forward. So again, going back, our proposal as it sits in front of you without change today be to allow pets in park facilities. It would allow them for a $10 reservation fee, and it gives us the latitude to move forward with that and what works and what doesn't. So with that, I should be happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Director Simpson. Does anybody have any questions for Scott on this one? I think, like he said, we've heard a lot about this over the last few months. Commissioner Bees.
Commissioner Bees here. I guess with this proposal, I'm glad you're considering, you know, keeping pets out of. Some of them wish the percentage would have been in here already. What percentage of the rentals were not going to be allowed pets and which was? I wish that was in the proposal. So, I mean, down the road, it's hard to say, you know, maybe you're like you said, 100% Shade Hill, but maybe 5% ain't and somewhere else, you know, it'd be nice to know that to be part of the proposal